But what did happen after the plot, after that terrible day on September 11th, and I was part of this, was the president swung into action and immediately began to change the entire infrastructure of our defense.
All right, so this guy, Chertoff, is one of the most evil 9/11 fucks on the planet. Also one of the people that have profiteered as much as anybody, which is what he just stated in that beginning comment that I put there, is that, you know, he says, we're not going to relitigate 9/11. Yes, we are. We're going to. Guaranteed. One of these days, we're going to get the chance. You fucks are going. Your families are going to live in ridicule for the evil deeds that you did. This guy, what he just said was George Bush reconfigured the entire war profiteering infrastructure, and which is what the whole project for the new American century was about. Rewiring, giving the war profiteering a big rev up. That was what, you know, all we need is a new Pearl Harbor type event. Come on, Donald. You can say it. Project for a new American century. That's what it's all about. This guy is one of those people. I'm pretty sure he was one of the original signees with Jeb Bush of the Project for a New American Century. And we're supposed to take, and these are the people that are up there, and we're supposed to take their word for it about what happened on September 11th and how we're not going to relitigate it. We have to look forward and, you know, and if you look at their smiles on their faces at the end of this segment, which I let run a little long so that you could see the smiles on their faces good, well, it's like, yeah, we made so much money off of 9/11. I just did a good job, didn't I, Cherty? I just made it look like I was hitting you hard, and they're gonna love it. You know, I looked strong. And meanwhile, we both have made like $1 billion off of the victims of 9/11 and the fucking wars that we perpetrated and propagandized, not only in Iraq and in Afghanistan, but around the world and in America. Who these two people are evil war profiteers, and you can see it on their smirky little faces at the end of the interview. You guys, we gotta evolve beyond war. This war shit, it's fine to be prepared, but we're doing it. We're instigating it. We're making it happen. We're killing little children to make a shiny penny for evil fucks like this. And only you and I can stop it. Thanks for tuning in.
Meanwhile, the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001 becoming a major issue today for the two candidates, for at least two candidates in the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump is standing by his criticism of former President George W. Bush. Jeb Bush is defending his brother and questioning whether Trump is fit to be commander-in-chief. Today on Fox News, Trump reiterated his point that the 9/11 attacks happened while George W. Bush was in charge.
But I'm not blaming anybody. I don't like to go back and blame. I like to look to the future. I'm not blaming anybody. The only thing I said, well, you know, he said we were safe. Well, the fact is we had the worst attack in the history of our country during his reign. Jeb said we were safe during his reign. That wasn't true. And that's the only thing I pointed out. And I'm not blaming anybody, and I'm not blaming George Bush.
Jeb Bush came to his brother's defense on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper.
My brother responded to a crisis, and he did it as you would hope a president would do. He united the country, he organized our country, and he kept us safe. And there's no denying that. The great majority of Americans believe that, and I don't know why he keeps bringing this up. It doesn't show that he's a serious person as it relates to being commander-in-chief and being the architect of a foreign policy.
While Trump concedes there were no more attacks on the U.S. homeland during George W. Bush's tenure, he did blame George W. Bush for going to war against Iraq.
Well, we haven't had a
9/11.
major problem at home. I agree with that. I never disagreed with that. But we attacked a country. We spent $2 trillion attacking a country, and you know what we have for it right now? Zero.
All right, let's talk about all of this with a former official in George W. Bush's administration who's now a major Jeb Bush supporter. Michael Chertoff is a former Secretary of Homeland Security. He's currently an advisor to the Jeb Bush campaign. Michael Chertoff, thanks very much, Mr. Secretary,
Good to be
for
on.
coming in. Let's talk about what Donald Trump's allegation against the man you want to be the next president of the United States is. And I think he's also in part referring to the conclusions of the 9/11 Commission, which did say this. It did say the 9/11 attacks were a shock, but should not have come as a surprise. And then it goes through all the many months, 9 or 10 months that Bush was president, where Richard Clark and others kept warning that an attack was imminent. It could be planes, it could be New York, and not enough was being done.
So let's be clear. First of all, a number of the critical hijackers actually came into the country prior to President Bush assuming office. This was a plot that was planned years in advance. It unfolded over a period of time. There was no actionable intelligence that pointed specifically or even in general to an aviation plot of the kind that we saw.
Let me correct you on that, because it did say, and this is a quote from the August 6th, 2001, This is a couple of months before 9/11, presidential daily briefing entitled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. FBI information since 1998 indicates patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings in New York.
Correct. So that would lead you, if you were going to focus on that, to look at federal buildings being surveilled on the ground. My point is, Wolf, that although we had a system that needed to be repaired, and President Bush did repair it, there was no specific intelligence that pointed to the plot that actually happened. But what did happen after the plot, after that terrible day on September 11th, and I was part of this, was the president swung into action and immediately began to change the entire infrastructure of our defense. We created much harder and tougher barriers to people coming in from overseas. We expanded our intelligence capability. We tore down the legal barriers that had prevented information sharing. The president went into Afghanistan and pushed al-Qaeda out of its safe haven. And by the way, we discovered laboratories where they were experimenting with chemical weapons, and we shut that down. All of us remember that within a day or two after that terrible day, the president got up in front of the World Trade Center, which was still smoking, and said, we're going to bring justice to them, or we're going to bring them to justice, and he did it.
And there's no doubt all those steps you mentioned after 9/11 indeed happened. One step that he also took was going to war against Saddam Hussein and claiming there were weapons of mass destruction stockpiles in Iraq, resulting in the deaths of more than 4,000 U.S. troops, tens of thousands injured, as Donald Trump keeps saying, trillions of dollars spent, wasted on a war that had nothing to do with 9/11. His point, Donald Trump's point, is President Bush did not keep America safe when he invaded Iraq.
Well, I'm not going to quibble with Donald Trump trying to make his words fit reality. What I do want to talk about, though, is we're not going to relitigate 9/11 or relitigate the Iraq War. What's important is what do we do going forward. Right now, the threat picture around the world is worse than it was prior to 9/11. Now, we are much stronger in this country. We're much tougher. We're much less vulnerable. But if you look at the spread, the metastasis of violent jihadism, it is now spread out of where it was in Pakistan and Afghanistan, literally from North Africa all the way over to Bangladesh. And that creates a much larger pool of people who are looking to carry out attacks against Americans and other Westerners.
Here's what a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters are now saying today in the aftermath of this exchange between Donald Trump and Jeb Bush. If you don't want to relitigate, review what President Bush's responsibility was for not having America prepared for 9/11. What's the point of going after Hillary Clinton on Benghazi?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a point about going after people. I think the issue people are looking at in Benghazi ought to be a broader question. Did the administration fool itself into believing that it had eliminated the terrorist threat when it killed bin Laden? Did they essentially engage in wishful thinking that actually impaired their ability to take a realistic, cold-eyed look at the situation of the world? And again, the point is not to go punish people or blame people, but as we are now, as we see the Russians in Syria, as we see ISIS controlling territory greater in size than Indiana, Are we being honest with ourselves about the threat, and are we taking the steps we need to do to suppress it?
Before I let you go, your quick reaction to these reports now that Nevin Perez, our justice reporter, just reported it, that some high school kid allegedly hacked into the private email accounts of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, and the CIA Director, John Brennan, which, if true, is pretty disturbing, obviously.
Well, actually, the important thing is these are not official accounts that are secured by the U.S. government. These are private accounts. I don't know what particular service they used.
AOL and Comcast.
Yeah, but the reality is those are commercial services, and almost every service has been hacked at one point or another. And frankly, the U.S. government was hacked. OPM was hacked. So this is a feature of our modern life. And there's an old saying, there are two types of institutions, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked.
So what are you saying? The government officials like a CIA director, a Secretary of Homeland Security should not have a private Gmail or AOL or Comcast account?
I'm saying you got to recognize there's a risk if you use a commercial account, and you've got to be careful what you put on email. Now, if someone wants to download information about where you're taking a dog for the kennel, big deal. I wouldn't put highly personal things in a location that would allow it to be captured and disseminated by others.
I assume when you were Secretary of Homeland Security, you had a government account and you also had a private account.
Actually, Wolf, I had no email.
Oh, really?
And that was the most secure of all.
No email is pretty secure, all right? You did it the old-fashioned way.
I did it the old-fashioned way.
You actually talked to people.
Right.
Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for coming in. You're going to hear from the front runner in the Republican race for the White House, Donald Trump. He'll be a guest on CNN's New Day tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. Hillary Clinton was the consensus winner of last.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.